Every truth hides a darker secret.
He wasn't a ghost. He was a teacher, a father, and the worst killer the Soviet Union ever produced. For 12 years, he hunted in a country that said monsters didn't exist. This is not just a story about a man. It's a story about a system that taught him how to hide. The Butcher of Rostov. In the winter of 1978, in the Soviet city of Shakhty, a little girl disappeared on her way home from school. Her name was Yelena Zakotnova. For 3 days, no one reported it to the newspapers. For 3 weeks, no one in Moscow even knew. Because in the Soviet Union, crime, real crime, did not exist. It could not exist. The state was perfect, the people honest. And murder was something that happened only in capitalist countries. So when a child vanished, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was an ideological problem. An ideology, in those years, always came first. Her body was found under a small bridge near a factory canal. The police arrested a local man, a truck driver named Alexander Kravchenko. He was convicted and executed. Case closed. Except, the murders didn't stop over the next 12 years, across the forests, fields, and railway stations of southern Russia. Dozens of children and women would vanish. They came from villages, from bus stops, from streets that smelled of coal and iron. They were poor, forgotten, invisible. And that made them perfect victims, in a country where no one wanted to admit that monsters could exist. When the truth finally surfaced, the count was 52 confirmed victims. Dozens more suspected. And behind it all, a man who looked ordinary. A former teacher. A father. A party member. His name was Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. For more than a decade, he lived in the gaps between institutions. Too intelligent for the police to suspect. Too awkward for anyone to love. Too careful to be caught. The newspapers would later call him the Butcher of Rostov. But the truth is far more disturbing. Because this isn't just the story of one killer. It's the story of a system that refused to see him. A bureaucracy that punished the innocent. And a silence so deep, it allowed evil to grow unnoticed. When the Soviet Union collapsed, so did the illusion that it had been in control. And from the ruins came this case. A mirror held up to a dying empire. It showed that the state could build rockets, feed armies, conquer space. But it couldn't recognize the monster standing right beside it. This is not a horror story. It's a history lesson written in blood. A story about fear, denial, and how truth becomes the first victim of any regime. Title: The Butcher of Rostov, When a System Creates a Monster. He was born in 1936. In a small Ukrainian village called Yablukny, near the city of Kharkiv. It was the time of famine, the Holodomor. People starved in silence while the party insisted everything was fine. Andrei Chikatilo came into the world already hungry. Not just for food, but for warmth, for affection, for something human. His father went to war. His mother stayed behind, half mad with grief and hunger. His childhood stories were not of fairy tales, but of neighbors who disappeared, and children who were eaten during the famine. He would later tell investigators, when you grow up in a place where everyone is dying, you learn not to feel anything. At school, he was intelligent but weak. A quiet boy who blushed easily, who read more than he spoke. He stuttered. He failed to fit in, and children notice weakness faster than adults do. He grew into a tall, awkward teenager. Always watching, always outside the circle. And there was another secret, one that would shape his whole life. He was impotent. In a culture where masculinity was tied to patriotism and pride. That weakness filled him with shame. He would later describe it as a hole that nothing could fill. Every humiliation, every rejection, became part of a private world where anger grew quietly. In the 1960s, he became a teacher. To everyone else, he was Comrade Chikatilo. Educated, serious, politically reliable. A man of the system. He taught Russian language and literature to teenagers. But behind the classroom walls, he was already slipping into another self. There were rumors. Inappropriate behavior with students. Unexplained touches. A girl's scream in the hallway that no one wanted to talk about. The school administration didn't investigate. They transferred him quietly to another school. Because in the Soviet Union, a scandal was worse than a crime. And as long as there was no report, there was no problem. He kept moving from school to school, from town to town. Each time, the pattern repeated. A complaint, an investigation that never really happened. A quiet dismissal, and a new job waiting elsewhere. The system didn't see him as dangerous. Just embarrassing. And in the world of bureaucracy, embarrassment was a greater sin than murder. In 1978, when he was 42. He found a new job at a factory in Shakhty. A lonely man, divorced. A failed teacher with a nervous smile and a quiet voice. That same year, a 9-year-old girl disappeared on her way home. Her name was Yelena Zakatnova. The one whose death opened our story. When her body was found, the investigation barely looked his way. He was a model citizen. A teacher, a party member. A man with no record, no scandal. He was questioned once. Then released. Another man was executed for that murder. And that moment, that mistake, became his permission. From that day, something inside him changed. The shame that had always paralyzed him turned into power. Killing became the only moment he could feel control. Each act was a repetition. Not of lust, but of vengeance against a world that had made him invisible. And the world rewarded him for it. With silence. He was not wrong. In the Soviet Union of the late 1970s, no one wanted to notice. The police were under pressure to show that socialism was safe. Statistics had to look perfect. Reports of murder were edited, hidden, or reclassified as domestic disputes. Andrei Chikatilo thrived in that silence. He had found a perfect camouflage. A system that refused to see monsters. In the early 1980s, the Soviet Union was still pretending everything was fine. Factories were working. Banners spoke of progress and glory. And somewhere, far from the parades, children kept disappearing. 1982. Near the city of Shakhty. A young girl, missing. Then a boy, found dead by the river. Then another, along the railway line. Each case, closed quietly. Each report, buried under paper. The word serial killer did not exist in the official vocabulary. The idea itself was considered Western propaganda, but inside the Ministry of Internal Affairs, a few men began to notice the pattern. Among them, Major Mikhail Fetisov and forensic expert Dr. Viktor Bukhanovsky, a psychiatrist who would later become known as Russia's Hannibal Lecter. But for very different reasons. They saw what others refused to. The same injuries, the same methods. The same invisible hand moving across the map of southern Russia. When they presented their findings to Moscow, the answer was silence. Or worse, denial. There are no maniacs in the Soviet Union, said one party official. This is an invention of the West. And so, the killings continued. Chikatilo had learned how to vanish. He hunted where the police were blind. Near train stations, markets, and bus stops. He looked for runaways, prostitutes, the poor, the forgotten. People who wouldn't be missed immediately. He would offer food, a job, a promise. Lead them to a quiet forest. And there his other self took over. He was methodical, obsessive. Each killing was planned like a ritual. The location changed. But the choreography was the same. Isolation, domination, release. And after it was over, he cleaned himself, straightened his tie, and went home to his wife and 2 children. He was invisible again. By 1984, there were dozens of victims. The police were under immense pressure. They needed results, fast. So they began to arrest anyone who looked suspicious. Farmers. Alcoholics. Men caught masturbating in public. Many were beaten into confessions. Some were executed. The real killer read about their deaths in the newspapers. And smiled. He realized the system itself was his best ally. He could kill. And the state would punish someone else for it. At one point, an officer asked Moscow for permission to set a trap using psychological profiling. The answer came back. We are not America. We do not use such capitalist nonsense. So Chikatilo kept hunting. Between 1985 and 1990, he murdered across multiple regions. Rostov, Voroshilovgrad, Moscow, Tashkent, Leningrad. Always near transportation. Always mobile. Always ahead. He blended into the background. A middle-aged man with a briefcase. Polite, even helpful. Sometimes he helped police volunteers search for his own victims. He would later tell them, "I was always there. Right beside you. You just never looked." By 1989, the killings had become impossible to hide. The bodies were piling up. Even the KGB could no longer suppress the panic. Posters appeared quietly in factories and schools. Beware of strangers. Travel in groups. Major Fetisov formed a special task force, the largest in Soviet criminal history. Undercover agents watched train stations day and night. They tracked every suspect with sexual offenses on record. But Chikatilo was never on that list. His old cases had been erased. Administratively resolved. The man they were hunting didn't officially exist. Then, finally, a break. November 1990. A patrolman named Igor Rybakov noticed a man leaving a forest near Novokakharsk. It was cold. The man was nervous, covered in mud. His coat stained with blood at the cuff. Inside his bag, rope, a knife, a jar of Vaseline. They took him in for questioning. Name, Andrei Chikatilo. Occupation, supply clerk. Address, Rostov-on-Don. A party member. A father. Nothing remarkable. He denied everything. There wasn't enough evidence, yet. He was released. 2 weeks later, another child was found dead. This time, the task force watched him closely. They followed his every move. Recorded his conversations. Waited. On November 20, 1990, they caught him at a bus stop after he had lured another boy. He resisted. When they searched his coat, they found the same knife, the same rope, the same pattern, and under his fingernails, blood. He was arrested again. This time, he would not walk free after 12 years. The invisible man was visible. And what the investigators would hear next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The first time they questioned him, he smiled. A polite, almost shy man in his mid-50s. Gray hair neatly combed, wire-frame glasses glinting under fluorescent light. He looked more like a librarian than a murderer. The detectives asked questions. He answered calmly. No, he hadn't been near the forest. No, he didn't know the children. No, he'd never hurt anyone. For hours, he sat there. Quiet, patient. As if waiting for them to realize their mistake. But the evidence was growing. Blood on his coat. Knife marks that matched the wounds. The strange objects in his briefcase. Still, he denied everything. Not out of fear, but pride. Then the investigators brought in Dr. Viktor Bukhanovsky, a psychiatrist from Rostov who had studied sexual deviance for decades. He didn't come to threaten Chikatilo. He came to understand him. Bukhanovsky sat across from the suspect and spoke quietly. not as a policeman but as another human being. He told him he knew about his impotence, about his humiliation, about the hunger for power disguised as desire. He told him that he was sick, not insane, but trapped in his own weakness. Something changed in the room. Chikatilo's posture softened. His hand stopped trembling. He looked up. And for the first time, he spoke. Over the next 2 weeks, he confessed to 52 murders. In disturbing detail, he described each victim, their names, the locations, the order. He drew maps. He remembered the weather, the clothes they wore, the look on their faces before they stopped moving. He didn't remember their birthdays, or their families, or their dreams. Only how long it took them to die. He said, "I couldn't feel pleasure like other men, so I made them feel my power instead." Another time, he told Bukhanovsky, "When I killed, I felt free. I was the judge. I decided who lived, who died. I was the law." To the officers, it was monstrous. To Bukhanovsky, it was textbook. A man shaped by shame, starved of empathy, and protected by a society that refused to admit he could exist. Bukhanovsky later said, "He was not a beast. He was a man who became his own punishment." The trial began in 1992, in the city of Rostov-on-Don. It was one of the first open trials in post-Soviet history. The courtroom overflowed with journalists and grieving families. For the first time, the people could see what the state had hidden from them for decades. Chikatilo sat inside a steel cage, built to protect him from the crowd. He smirked, laughed, shouted insults. He told the judge he was a mistake of nature. At moments, he sang. At others, he screamed at the families in the audience. It was both theater and confession. A grotesque reflection of a country trying to understand the monster it had birthed. He said during the trial, "You're all like me. You kill with your silence. You think you're better? I just did it honestly." The prosecutor asked if he felt remorse. He smiled. "Remorse? What is that? I didn't kill them, I freed myself." On October 15, 1992, he was found guilty on 52 counts of murder, sentenced to death. When the verdict was read, he turned to the judge and whispered, "I'm a mistake. You can't fix a mistake. You can only erase it." He was executed by gunshot in 1994. A single bullet to the back of the head, in a soundproof chamber in Novokakharsk prison. No one witnessed it. No one marked the grave. His body was buried in an unmarked hole. Just another secret in a country full of them. The Butcher of Rostov was dead. But the world that created him, the fear, the silence, the bureaucracy, lived on after the execution. The file was closed. Or so they said. But the story didn't end with the bullet. It began again, in the mind of one man who refused to look away. Dr. Viktor Bukhanovsky. He kept every note, every drawing, every word that Andrei Chikatilo had spoken. He recorded sessions on old magnetic tapes, stored them in metal boxes. To him, they were not souvenirs of horror. They were an autopsy of the human soul. Bukhanovsky was asked once why he spent years studying a monster. He said, "If we refuse to understand them, we will never see them coming again." In his files, he described Chikatilo as a split being, a man who believed pain was the only proof he existed. He was not insane in the clinical sense. He was what Bukhanovsky called morally dead but logically alive. When the Soviet Union collapsed, its archives opened like wounds. The Chikatilo case became a mirror for the country itself. Students of criminology pored over his confessions, trying to map madness with statistics. They found something worse than madness: banality. He was not a genius, not possessed, not demonic. He was a bureaucrat of pain, diligent, routine, punctual. He logged his murders like a factory worker clocking in and out. He spoke of them the way an accountant speaks of numbers. And that was the real terror. Evil without drama, only discipline. For modern Russia, the case remains a study in failure. A system built to control everything, and yet blind to the worst within it. Files from the 1980s show how many innocents were tortured into confessions. How the police recorded solved crimes that weren't. How fear of losing face cost dozens of lives. Each page is a lesson in what happens when truth becomes a political enemy. Today, the Chikatilo files sit in climate-controlled vaults in Rostov. Bukhanovsky's tapes are used to train detectives and psychologists. Some of them can barely listen for more than a few minutes. Not because of the violence, but because of how ordinary it sounds. When you remove the ideology, the madness, the myth, you hear a voice that could belong to anyone. Maybe that's why we still speak his name. Not to remember him, but to remember what made him possible. Silence. Shame. Bureaucracy. Obedience. Every system has its Chikatilo. Not always a man with a knife, sometimes a rule, a lie, a fear that kills truth instead of people. Evil is not a creature. It's a condition. And when we pretend it doesn't exist, it flourishes in the dark. If you've listened this far, remember. Monsters don't come from hell. They come from silence.